And welcome to week 6 of performance management. This week we are covering chapter 9, which is all about performance management leadership with a specific emphasis on coaching and development. So, as you know from prior weeks in this course and from reading the textbook, a significant part of performance management is really checking in with employees and helping them to improve upon their performance. So, we have to first define performance and know exactly what it is we're paying attention to. We have to be able to assess it and have a standardized way of doing that, either through results or behaviors or both. We need to have an established rating or ranking system so that we can not only assess behaviors but do so in a way that's fair and consistent. And by doing that, we're going to be able to identify areas in which our employees are excelling and areas in which they need improvement. And that's really the development process. And so this focus on coaching suggests that we aren't just monitoring performance, right? We're not just rating employees, but we're really working with them to identify where they can continue to grow and areas in which they really are great contributors to our organization and to continue to hone those skills. So again, we're focusing on this coaching process, and through the coaching process, how we can work to develop our employees in a more effective way. So there are 5 steps to the coaching process. And the first is that we have to set development goals. So this is really part of the performance review process that we're setting development goals for the next performance review cycle so that employees know what they're working toward. And so really we use that as the starting point of where coaching comes into play. After we set goals, we're going to identify development activities and the resources that are needed in order to help fulfill those development activities, whether it's attending a course, if it's getting some kind of certification, if it's some sort of mentorship or training program, etc. But we need to identify what we expect the employee to do and the resources that will be needed in order to fulfill those activities. Then the employee is going to implement the development activities, and maybe they will do this with some guidance, or maybe they'll do it on their own, sort of with some self-direction, but we have to see them go through the development activities in order to improve their skills. As the coach, we're going to observe and document those development behaviors and results. So we're looking to see if there are changes, if there are improvements, if we're seeing changes in the behaviors, the results that are important to us as an organization. So all of the steps that we talked about, all the strategies for documenting information still hold, as we talked about in the prior weeks. And then we have to be able to give feedback. So where we're really focusing our discussion this week is on this observing and documenting behaviors as well as giving feedback. So paying attention to the type of information that we're recording, but also how we go about sharing that information back with the employee. So this mini lecture is going to really hone in on these 2 steps at the end of the coaching process. And again, this is cyclical, it's ongoing. You're not just a coach for steps 1 to 5 and then you're done. It's ongoing so that every performance review cycle, whether it's quarterly or if it's semi-annually, should be going through this process. So we're focusing on developing employees because it's really important that we aren't just managing performance. I mean, I know that's the title of the course, but we're really managing people and not just what they're doing or what they're producing, but actual human beings. And I think sometimes that gets lost when we try to treat performance management as like a checklist of things we need to do. So by developing employees, we're going to be able to build better relationships with our workers. And of course, that's going to have a positive impact on them. And it's also going to have a positive impact on the organization. So we really need to shift our mindset, I think, from just monitoring performance to more of developing employees. So we're not just engaging in performance management because it's something that we have to do, right? It's our performance review cycle, but rather we're trying to help employees to really become the best version of themselves, the best version of their employee that they're able to be. So I want to just remind you all, and you might know this, and some of what we're going to talk about today might feel a bit intuitive, but it's good to have reminders so that it's in the forefront of your mind, and then you can make conscious choices to try to implement this information in your day-to-day work. So employees are a work in progress. All individuals are a work in progress, and that means that there are going to be areas in which they can continue to grow and develop, and they're not going to be perfect. They're not always going to make the right choice. They're not always going to produce exactly what we want. And so I think it's important to remind ourselves that we need to give each other and our employees a little bit of grace. Now, this doesn't mean if somebody's consistently underperforming that we just let it slide, but to recognize that everybody has room for improvement. Related to that, I think it's important to mention that all employees are going to require development, regardless of if there are star employees. There are areas in which we can continue to grow. And then there are times when we need to continue to cultivate our strengths. So a strength is only a strength if we continue to put time and effort toward it. So if we ignore our strengths over time, they're not going to benefit us any longer. So regardless of where our employees fall in terms of their performance rankings or in terms of their ratings, everybody can benefit from this development process. We need to view feedback as a tool and not a threat. And I think from the employee standpoint, this is really important because feedback is how we learn to grow. It's how we identify where we might have some gaps in knowledge or skills and can help point us towards some directions for improving. But oftentimes the way it's administered is not effective, and that can feel very threatening to employees. So when they sit down for their annual performance review, it's oftentimes very anxiety producing. They aren't sure what's going to be said. Maybe it's their only opportunity to really interface with their manager, in a more traditional model. And oftentimes it's tied to benefits and the raise that they might get. And so there's just a lot of high stakes involved. And that can make this whole process feel very overwhelming and threatening. But by using some of the strategies that we're going to learn in this module, we can help feedback to be more of a tool and to be more valuable and not feel so threatening to our employees. And we've been talking about continuous feedback all semester, and we're going to keep talking about continuous feedback because it's really important to employee development. It's really important to performance management. And the reason for that is it can help prevent fires, right? If we are monitoring what our employees are doing and we're checking in with them and we're trying to focus on their development plans and how they're performing and whether or not they're making progress on those plans, that can help us catch things that might be going awry. So if we only meet once or twice a year, obviously, we're going to have missed our opportunities to step in when we needed to. But by using continuous feedback, we can identify areas where employees need continued support, and we can help them work through that versus if we just wait, for a lot of time to pass and for small things to become quite large. So development is it's necessary, it's important, and it's going to provide a lot of benefits to the employee and to the organization. So just as we document performance, we also need to document development behaviors and results. So what strategies, what behaviors are our employees engaging in, what activities are they engaging in order to continue to develop their knowledge, their skills, and their abilities. So as we're documenting these behaviors and results, it's important to be specific. So, we don't want to use very vague language. We don't want to say things like they are showing good progress. That's not really helpful. So we want to know exactly what our employees are doing and exactly what steps they're engaging in order to see through their development goals. We want to use adverbs and adjectives sparingly, which means we don't want to use overly flowery language, right? Just saying things like good or bad is not very helpful. So again, trying to tie this back to things that are specific, that are measurable. Just as we write our goals, it's very important for our documentation to also be very specific. We want to balance positives with negatives. I think oftentimes when we're documenting performance, we tend to focus on those things that employees can improve. We tend to focus on all the ways that, they aren't meeting our expectations or kind of have a deficit approach. And I think that that's really one area where we can make the biggest difference in our employees' experiences is by balancing positives with negatives. Because when things are going well, we tend to not say that they're going well. And instead we wait to intervene until we see something occurring that we perceive as negative. So taking the chance and being very purposeful in documenting positive and negative behaviors and results is important for our employees. We also need to focus on job-related information. So this is really important that we aren't including information that's not relevant to the job, or we're not being biased with information related to our employees' beliefs or their behaviors outside of work or their friends or networks outside of work. I mean, none of that is important to the job. And so it's just important to tell ourselves this is what we're focusing on, just job-related information only. We need to be comprehensive, and this means we're going to include all behaviors and results that are part of this current performance review cycle. So any development, behavior, result that our employees engaged in throughout the entire review period, and not just within, the most recent weeks, or not just at the beginning of the cycle. We really have to ensure that we're capturing the full time length. And we want to have standardized procedures so that we are documenting the same kind of behaviors and results, that we are sharing that information in the same way across employees. So all employees deserve to have the same amount of information and to be evaluated in the same process. So a lot of this information really holds true from what we've already discussed earlier in the semester, but it is good to review. And then, of course, describing observable behaviors and results, which I mentioned just a few minutes ago, but making sure that the things that we are talking about are observable and that we're able to clearly define exactly what it is that we have seen and that we're looking for. So once we've gathered this information related to development, we have to find a way to give it back to our employees, right? We have to tell them what we found. And this is really the feedback process. And giving feedback is an essential part of being a coach. And the way we deliver it is going to make a huge impact on our employees. So feedback includes past performance. So feedback is always going to discuss things that we have done in the past. But it's also going to have this future component, and it's going to identify future areas for development and progress. So we need to tell the employee what they did and what we observed, but then we also need to focus on the future in ways they can either continue doing what they're doing, continue to build on what they're doing, or if they need to make some changes, what those can look like. And I think oftentimes we tend to focus only on the past, really giving employees a list of things that we documented without helping them to connect that past performance to future action. So good feedback is going to help them also be future oriented so they can continue to see the ways in which they can grow with our organization. The purpose of feedback really should be to build confidence and self-efficacy among our employees. So as I mentioned, feedback can feel very threatening to employees, and this is typically because it's not delivered in a way that's really beneficial for them. So when we use feedback appropriately, it's going to help them build confidence because they're going to understand the things that they're doing well, but it'll also help them understand ways in which they can continue to improve. And over time, if we see this development process through, they are going to improve. I mean, that is the whole point of development. So over time, they're going to become more confident in their abilities. And it also develops competence. So they not only feel more confident, they not only feel more self-assured that they can do the work, but we're actually going to see improvements in their competence and in their skills and abilities. So it's not just that they're feeling better, but actually performing better too. And so this is a direct result of engaging in development conversations, engaging in development feedback in the coaching process. We're helping employees identify ways that they can improve, and then they're going to actually improve and what a difference that's going to make. We also see that feedback enhances engagement among employees. Simply put, the employees want to know that they are valued. They want to know that their performance is making a difference and that we're seeing them and what they're contributing to the organization. So even when we sit down and have a conversation with employees about ways to improve their performance, they still value that because it's as though somebody is invested in them and cares enough about them to want to help them improve. So feedback, again, when administered appropriately and effectively, is going to help our employees just to feel as though they're more cared about and that they are important and valued within our organization. So it doesn't have to always be positive praise to get employees engaged, but just simply the fact that we're taking the time and we care enough to want them to be better is going to help them feel better about the organization, feel more committed and involved in the organization. So as I've mentioned a few times, the way that feedback delivered is going to determine its effectiveness, which essentially means that just giving feedback doesn't really make you a coach, particularly if we're doing it in a way that feels rude or hurtful or biased or just flat out wrong, right? If we're not using the right information, that is certainly not going to garner employee enthusiasm or support. So there are some best practices that we can use in order to ensure that our feedback really is effective. We're going to talk about those in the coming slides. So we're going to focus now, or focus first, I guess, on positive feedback. We otherwise would call this praise. So again, as I mentioned, I think our default is to focus on discrepancies or to focus on deficiencies among our employees, and this sometimes leads us to forget to give them the praise that they deserve when they have done really great work. But praise is important. And so in order to give praise, there are a few guidelines. The first is that we should be sincere. And I know that sounds kind of, like, oh yeah, I get that, so what? But it's really important that we give employees our time, our intention, and that what we're saying is accurate and honest. Because if we praise something, our employees are going to keep doing it. So it's not good practice to just give somebody a compliment, right, if we don't actually mean it. So what we praise will be repeated, and that is important to remember as a manager and as a coach and as a leader. For this reason, we really want to only give praise when it's warranted. If we're always giving praise all the time, it might lose its value. It's not going to be as motivating. So again, making sure that we're honest, but making sure that it applies to the employee. An important part of praise is making sure that we link our praise to specific behaviors and results so that the employee is very clear on what it is that they are receiving praise for. So if we simply say, hey, you've been doing a great job, I mean, that sounds nice, but the employee isn't really sure exactly what it is that's led them to be doing a great job. So by linking very specific behaviors and results to praise, we are going to help our employees learn what behaviors are valued so that they keep doing them time and again. And again, when we're giving praise, really take time and act pleased for the employee. Give them your full attention. Don't be staring at your computer screen. Don't be interrupted with cell phones and text messages, looking at your smartwatches. I mean, there are just so many distractions that exist in the workplace, and we only have a limited amount of time. But when we're giving praise, it can sincerely be done in 5 minutes or less. So really take the time to give that time to your employees. Make sure you're invested only on them as you're administering the praise. It will sink in more, and it will feel more authentic to the employee. And then I want to just mention that we should not praise the absence of negatives, which sometimes we might interpret as like a backhanded compliment. So we wouldn't want to say, oh, that was much better than last time, or it could have been a lot worse, right? We don't want to be giving that kind of feedback. So if you can hone in on a very specific behavior that they did, hone in on a very specific outcome that they produced, that's what we want to be praising. So this model, the BET feedback model, actually does not appear in the textbook, but I wanted to share it with you all because I think it's a good template for how to give positive feedback, how to give praise to our employees. So simply put, this can give you a template of what to say and how to say it, and it can take some of the ambiguity out of feedback. And importantly, this helps standardize the feedback that we're giving so that way we aren't going on and on and on for hours with one employee and only spending 2 minutes with another. So if we follow this feedback, we're ensuring that the content, the delivery of feedback is really fair across employees, but we'll also see that it's a pretty simple structure that you can implement basically right away and with anybody. So the first thing that we need to do is identify the behavior that the individual is exhibiting that is benefiting the group. So we're going to very clearly call out whatever that behavior is that we find to be, above and beyond, or that we find to be particularly satisfactory or effective, so that the employee knows exactly what it is that they're doing. We're then going to identify the effect of that behavior on the team's success. So how is that specific behavior that they engaged in helping the team? How is it helping to further our goals or further the organizational goals? What is the outcome of that behavior? And then the T is the very simple part. We can simply say thank you. So as an example, oftentimes as I'm grading, particularly the discussion posts, I like to call out students that have been really engaged on the discussion board. So I might say, you were particularly active this week on the discussion board and made multiple posts throughout the week. By doing so, you really help to engender great conversation or thought-provoking conversation among the class, which makes the class more enjoyable for everybody. Thank you so much for your efforts. Right? This is a very simple way that we can administer the BET feedback model. Again, it doesn't take a lot of time, but it very clearly tells the individual what it is that they're doing so they know to keep doing it. It tells them how that behavior is having an effect so they can really see the consequences of their good behavior, particularly as it might relate back to our unit goals or our organizational goals. So here you can see how feedback plays an important role in strategic congruence. And then we just tell them thank you because, hey, we all just need to say thank you from time to time. So one thing I'm going to encourage you all to do is to look at your work team and identify somebody that you can test this model out on. So is there somebody that you can say thank you to, that you can acknowledge for doing particularly good work? It doesn't have to be a subordinate of yours. It can be a coworker, could even be your supervisor or your boss. So I really challenge you, identify one person and reach out to them, either in person at your job or send them an email or a text message. Try it, see what you get. I honestly, truly encourage you to do this because it makes such a difference. And by praising other people, it makes us feel good too. It can help us feel more engaged and invested in our work and in the people around us. Just, it feels good to do good. So that's my goal for you this week, okay? Find one person in your workspace and try this out. And as a little aside, this model actually works well for all of our social groups. So tell your partner or spouse, tell your child, right? Tell a friend. This model works not just in the workplace. So if your spouse took out the garbage and it felt like a once in a lifetime event, you want them to keep doing it, you might tell them, hey, thanks so much for taking out the garbage. It really took something off my plate and I just appreciated it so much. Thanks, right? Seriously, this model will work wonders and it just takes 2 minutes to do. Okay, so on the other hand, there are times when we have to give feedback that is constructive in nature. I don't really like to call it negative feedback. I like to use the term constructive feedback because we're not coming from a bad place, right? We're coming from a place of trying to develop our employees. So constructive feedback is important. If we don't give it, we will end up in what we call a feedback gap. And if you remember back to the first week of this class, we watched that video of the awkward performance review. This is where the feedback gap comes in, where that one person thought they were getting a raise and a promotion, and the supervisor basically wanted to fire them. If we don't meet and tell employees what's happening, they're not going to know what to do to improve. So constructive feedback, again, really should focus on improving future performance. So we're honing in on what they can do in the future. Yes, it's important to talk about what's been done in the past, but we don't want to harp on things too much, right? We want to tell employees this is what happened, but here's how we can move beyond it. We don't want to be dwelling or shaming them. Constructive feedback should be given early and often. So this is when we step in and we look at what our employees are doing and how they're doing it, and we intervene if need to. We let them know ways that we can, differently handle a situation, or if we didn't get an outcome that we intended, we step in early because we know that if we let performance go and we don't say anything at all, our employees are going to assume that they're doing good work. That's just kind of the default. In the absence of feedback, they're going to assume they're doing good work. So it really is incumbent upon us to step in and let them know if there are opportunities for improvement. Constructive feedback should not embarrass, punish, or chastise employees. And I just cannot underscore this enough, that we are not shaming people. We should not make them feel guilty about, if they're not living or working up to our expectations. It's just, we should be phrasing this as a way that it's helping them, that we want to work with them, right? And that there are ways to continue to improve in the future, but we really shouldn't be admonishing people. We also need to focus on behaviors within the employee's control. So there's no point giving feedback or trying to, tell them to make improvements if they can't make improvements. For instance, if you are in a recession and you are a sales employee, there's just only so much you can do. You can't make sales sometimes in a recession. It's very hard when people are lacking funds or, cutting back on excess spending, etc. So, if our employee is really doing everything that they can, then that's all we can focus on. We can't fix the economy, we can't fix all those external factors. So we really just want to hone in on what the employee is doing or is not doing and shaping those behaviors. I'd also encourage us to use a strengths-based approach, and we have a reading about this week where it talks about how we can continue to develop all the good things that our employees bring to the organization. So we can also hone in on what our employees' strengths are and trying to use those strengths to fix some of their deficits in other areas. So how can we utilize their strengths in order to help them improve in other ways in the organization? And so again, the reading this week will be really illuminating on what that strengths-based approach looks like. And in terms of the performance management field, we certainly see the strengths-based approach gaining momentum and becoming more of a common practice in organizations. So we have, all of these guidelines about giving constructive feedback. And if we want our employees to improve and develop, we have to give constructive feedback. But why is it so hard? I think what we often find is that individuals are just generally speaking conflict avoidant. They don't want to say something that might upset an employee. They're afraid of having the conversation. Sometimes they don't know what to say or how to say it. And they end up kind of losing their message, right? If you go on and you try to hide the negative within a big long message, you're hoping that the employee is just going to read through the lines, and that's just not a good approach. So it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to damage relationships. It doesn't have to be awkward. It really can actually be quite straightforward and very beneficial for you and the employee. So I'm going to give you another model that you can use. This is called the bear feedback model. So it's very similar to the BET model we talked about with giving praise, with a little minor tweak. So same as our prior model, when we're talking about constructive feedback, we're going to identify the behavior that the individual is exhibiting that's inhibiting the group. So what are they doing that is holding the group back, or what are they doing that is making their performance ineffective? We're going to talk about the effect of that behavior on the team's progress or success, or the effect of that behavior on the employee reaching their goals, the effect of that behavior on the overall mission of the organization. So more or less, we need to tie that behavior back to some important outcome or consequence. Like, why are we upset with this behavior? Why are we targeting it? Why is it problematic? Then what we're going to do is we're going to give a recommendation of the behavior that the individual could or should do instead. So, for instance, if an employee lost their cool with with a customer, right, and they yelled at the customer and they were very rude to them, we could say, notice that you were yelling at a customer the other day, and this obviously goes against our mission of delivering good customer service and might lead that individual to not want to come to our organization anymore. In the future, if you're starting to feel as though you're overwhelmed with a customer and you're not able to meet their needs, take a pause, come get another team member or come get your supervisor to step in. Something like that. Just helping them take a moment and pause, go get some help or some support, and come back for the customer. Just simply listing an alternative, what they could do and what you would like to see in the future, helps them to correct their behavior and to know what it is that they should be doing. And then you can describe the results. By getting a team member or getting a supervisor to help, you might be able to better regulate your emotions, and at the end of the day, will be better able to meet the needs of the customers. At the same time, we want to identify the possible consequences if somebody doesn't make changes to their behavior. So if, over time, if you continue with negative interactions with customers, it could decrease our overall store ratings, and it might have the negative effect on your overall performance evaluation. So this isn't a threat, right? We're not trying to make the individual, again, feel shamed or anything like that, but we're trying to help them see what the outcome is. So if you change your behavior, here's what it could be. And if you don't, here's what the consequences likely are. So we're just delivering this in a very even manner. We don't have to be all emotional about it. We don't have to be heightened, right? We want to just be very clear. And again, by following this model, we make sure that there aren't any details that are getting lost. Oftentimes, I find that individuals just add more and more information. They keep talking in circles because they're trying to diminish the negative feedback, and they get uncomfortable, and it's just a whole thing. And actually, as a personal story, when I was in college, I was actually in hospitality management, and I was a hotel manager long before I ever had the education to be a manager. Sincerely, I was a terrible manager. That's just the truth. And I had to fire somebody, and it took me well over an hour. It was a painstaking process because I kept kind of walking back what I wanted to say, and I tried to say the negative, but I didn't want to hurt their feelings. And it was just, oh my gosh, it was wild, and it was inefficient, and it was definitely not effective for that person. And I've come a long way, right? So learn from my mistakes, don't repeat them. But using this model can help you be very clear so that you are indicating what you need to the employee. You're doing so in a way that's fair and consistent across all employees, and you're not muddying it up by trying to backtrack, right? So we've talked through ways to give praise, we've talked through ways to give constructive feedback, and I want to just highlight a few of the strategies that are also talked about in the Aguinness textbook, some strategies for just making feedback effective in general. So the bet and the bear model are more templates that you can use, more scripts that you can follow when giving feedback, but these are some additional considerations you might want to make. So again, as we talked about, we want feedback to be timely and frequent. We want to make sure that we're delivering that performance feedback as close to the event as possible. So some of you have mentioned, you might have pets, and if your dog chews your shoe, but they did it 2 weeks ago and you just noticed, there's really no point in yelling at your dog today because they're a dog and they don't know, and why are you yelling at me? Our employees are similar, right? If something happened a week ago or 2 weeks ago and we don't address it, when we bring it up, it might feel like to the employee, why are you just now bringing this up? Why didn't you tell me then? So it's really important that we step in and give feedback as soon as possible. It's also helpful to look for similar behaviors to link patterns. So rather than, particularly if we're giving constructive feedback, rather than having a list of all the ways that our employee might have made a mistake, right, we can instead link those behaviors together to say something like, I've noticed that there has been a lack of attention to detail. So we don't have to pull up every single email or marketing piece that they've created that's been inaccurate, but it's instead can kind of link some of these behaviors together to tell them. On the contrary, we might say, I really noticed that you've been delivering excellent customer service, and that you've been overly accommodating and kind to our guests. Thank you so much. So it can go both ways, whether it's praise or constructive feedback, but making sure we're linking similar behaviors together, and that way we're not just delivering a list of performance behaviors. Privacy is really important, and there might be some differing opinions on this, but generally speaking, my recommendation would be that feedback should be delivered in private, whether it's positive or if it's constructive. And this is simply for the fact that these are private conversations focused on the employee's development, and they are personal to that individual. So, and I think it can be more meaningful as well when we take time to just meet with someone one-on-one and to deliver that feedback to them. So again, there's kind of an old adage that would say praise in public and punish in private. But my recommendation would be really all feedback given in private. Just some employees might not want the attention or even the public praise, and it is really a private thing related to their individual development. We want our feedback to be specific and verifiable. So we want to focus on specific behaviors. We want to focus on results that are accurate. We want to ensure that all of the details we've collected, we are able to, assume are true, that we've really done our homework. And again, we're focusing on those specific behaviors and results. We're not going to be broad and make generalizations, and we're definitely not going to be making it personal. So we don't want to talk about individual traits of somebody being lazy or incompetent, right? We want to focus on what they did or what they didn't do, and that way it won't feel like it's a personal attack. As we mentioned with the bet and the bear models, we want to link behaviors that we want to see or link behaviors that we don't want to see back to important consequences, so employees can really understand how their behaviors or how their results have an impact on the organization, on their own development, on the overall unit goals, etc. We also want to express confidence in the employee, and so I list a caveat here. We want to tell the employee that we believe in them, that we think they're doing a great job, and we know they can continue to develop. We want to say all that, but only if it's true. So if you really do believe that an employee can make strides and that they can continue to improve and develop, we want to tell them that. Our confidence is going to really go a long way in motivating them. But if you are putting an employee on a performance improvement plan, if they really seem to be on their way out and you don't necessarily know that they're going to be able to make the changes, then you don't want to tell them that, because it can have some implications in terms of legal constraints, and especially if we have to terminate an employee. So again, being honest and authentic and having confidence, but only if we really truly believe it. We want to be consistent in giving feedback in terms of tone and content. So the BET and BEAR model are really helpful for those continuous ongoing feedback reviews, because as things, as situations are arising, we can give feedback using that model. And it's brief, but it's also standardized so that everyone's kind of getting the same amount of information. It's not overly long-winded. And it's given in the same way. And we also want to be consistent in our tone when we're actually giving the feedback. So we don't want to be overly emotional. We don't want to be, anxious or angry with our employees. If we're feeling heightened emotions, probably now is not the good time to give that feedback. I think it's really important, this one more so than others, is that we want to first describe what's happened and then come to an evaluation, particularly if we're focusing on constructive feedback. So if we have seen something that has occurred, we're going to tell the employee what we observed and maybe get their feedback and say, is this consistent with your viewpoint? Because there are times when things might happen and we are making an assumption that isn't true. So we want to make sure we're just getting the employee's full side of the story, particularly if there's conflict involved with another employee or if we're thinking about counterproductive behaviors. So first we're going to tell them what we saw. We're going to ask them whether or not they agree or give them an opportunity to provide additional information that we might not have. And then once we have kind of their side of the story, then we'll evaluate whether or not we still think that behavior is problematic and a way to move past it in the future. And then lastly, and I think we could really add this on, particularly in that BEAR model of giving constructive feedback, the advice and idea generation. So not only offering ways or alternatives that we think could help improve, but soliciting employees' insight too. So after we kind of go through the steps of the BEAR model, we could ask if they have any questions or any of their own suggestions or ways they think that they could continue to improve in the future, maybe a way they could handle the situation differently going forward. So I guess we could add one more letter to that BET and BEAR model, is just giving the employee an opportunity to have a little bit of insight or any feedback that they might want to share with us, because really feedback should be a loop and we have to be just as open to receiving feedback as we are to giving feedback. So this is your mini lecture on how to give feedback and ways to do it in a way that is effective for our employees, particularly related to their development, because our employees are not going to develop without our guidance. So being able to share with them their successes and areas in which maybe they didn't quite make the mark is going to help them just become overall better employees. Okay, all, hope you have a wonderful week. I hope this was helpful, and good luck to you as you continue on in the module this week. And very lastly, I sincerely mean that I challenge you to give some positive feedback to someone in your life this week using our model. Practice it. The more you do it, the easier it'll get, the more comfortable you'll feel with it, and it'll just become more second nature to you. Okay, take care, all.